The coffee cup shattered against the concrete floor like a gunshot in the pre-dawn silence. Hot liquid splashed across polished boots, and for 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then, Marine Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Kane looked down at the mess, looked up at the woman who'd bumped into him, and his face went from surprise to contempt in the time it took his brain to register what he was seeing. A janitor. 5'6", maybe 130 pounds, soaking wet, wearing a maintenance uniform with no name tape and work boots that had seen better years. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation bun that was almost military precise, but not quite. Close enough to show she'd tried, sloppy enough to prove she wasn't one of them. She stood there holding a mop bucket, looking at the spreading puddle of coffee with an expression that was carefully neutral, professionally apologetic, completely unremarkable. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Kane had been having a bad morning before this happened. Equipment failures in the motor pool, a disciplinary hearing at 0800, and now some contractor had just destroyed the first decent coffee he'd tasted in a week. His voice cut through the humid Virginia air like a blade scraping stone. Outstanding. Just fucking outstanding. He didn't bother keeping his voice down. At 0530, the only people on this part of Quantico were Marines who'd heard worse and civilian contractors who'd better get used to it. You want to tell me how a grown adult doesn't know how to walk without destroying everything in her path? The woman set down her mop bucket with movements that were economical, controlled. When she straightened, her posture was exactly regulation. Spine straight, shoulders back, hands at her sides. Not approximately military bearing, exactly military bearing, but contractors picked up habits from watching Marines. It didn't mean anything. I apologize, Gunny. I'll clean that up right away. Her voice was steady, each word measured. No tremor, no defensiveness, no indication that being dressed down by a senior NCO at dawn was anything other than a minor inconvenience in her day. Kane studied her face, looking for the crack in the composure, the moment when civilian softness would show through. He'd been breaking people for 15 years. He knew how to find the pressure points, how to push until they folded. But this woman just looked back at him with gray eyes that were calm, patient, and completely unimpressed. Behind Kane, 3 other Marines had stopped to watch the show. Corporal Peters, Lance Corporal Williams, and PFC Davidson, all of them young, all of them eager to see how their gunny would handle some contractor who'd had the audacity to interfere with his morning routine. This was entertainment before the real work started. You'll clean it up? Kane stepped closer, using his height advantage, his bulk, the intimidation factor that came naturally after a decade and a half in the Corps. Lady, do you have any idea what you just cost me? That was the last decent coffee in the commissary. That was 15 minutes of my life standing in line while some boot made small talk about his girlfriend back home. That was my morning caffeine, which means now I'm going to be operating at about 60% until lunch. The woman reached into her back pocket and pulled out a small spray bottle and a roll of paper towels. Standard cleaning supplies, the kind every maintenance worker carried. She knelt beside the spill and began soaking up the coffee with efficient movements. Her breathing followed a deliberate pattern. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4. The kind of rhythm you learned in stress management training, the kind they taught in advanced tactical schools where panic could get you killed. But plenty of people learned breathing techniques. Yoga instructors, therapists, anyone who'd been through a decent stress management course. It didn't mean anything. Kane wasn't finished. Look at me when I'm talking to you. She looked up from the floor, still kneeling, still calm. Yes, Gunny? What's your name? Elena Vasquez. Well, Elena Vasquez, let me explain something to you about how things work on a Marine base. Marines have a job to do. That job involves protecting this country from people who want to kill Americans. When you interfere with that job, when you spill coffee on Marines who are trying to get ready to do that job, you're not just being clumsy. You're being a problem. She finished cleaning the spill and stood, depositing the used paper towels in a small trash bag attached to her cart. The movements were precise, practiced, the muscle memory of someone who'd been doing maintenance work for years, or someone who'd been trained to maintain equipment under stress, where every motion had to be deliberate because lives depended on it. I understand, Gunny. It won't happen again. Kane laughed, the sound harsh in the morning air. It won't happen again because you're going to stay the hell out of our way from now on. This is a Marine base, not some office building. We don't have time to babysit contractors who can't handle basic navigation. Behind him, the three Marines exchanged grins. This was how it was supposed to work. Hierarchy enforced, boundaries established, everybody in their proper place. The civilian world had gotten soft, but the Corps still understood how things worked, how they needed to work. The woman, Elena, nodded once. Understood, Gunny. But something in the way she said it made Kane pause. Not the words themselves, but the delivery. There was no resentment in her voice, no hurt feelings, no civilian outrage at being spoken to harshly. Just acknowledgement. The kind of acknowledgement you got from someone who understood exactly what you were doing and why, but wasn't particularly impressed by it. Something funny about this situation? Kane asked. No, Gunny, nothing funny at all. Before we continue with this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Kane studied her face one more time, looking for something he couldn't name. Then he stepped back, satisfied that the proper order had been restored. Clean up your mess and get back to whatever they pay you to do. And remember what I said about staying out of our way. He walked off, his Marines falling in behind him, their voices carrying back in fragments of conversation about breakfast plans and the day's training schedule. Elena watched them go, her expression never changing. When they disappeared around the corner of the barracks building, she returned to her cleaning cart and continued down the sidewalk, moving with the steady pace of someone who had work to do and wasn't going to let one confrontation derail her schedule. But in the growing morning light, as she pushed the cart toward the next building on her route, there was something in her posture that suggested the interaction had cost her more than she'd let on. Not embarrassment or hurt feelings, but something deeper. The weight of holding yourself still when every instinct screamed to respond, the exhaustion that came from maintaining a performance that required constant vigilance. She reached the entrance to the administrative building and paused, looking back toward where Kane and his Marines had disappeared. For just a moment, her carefully neutral expression slipped, replaced by something that was harder to read. Assessment, maybe, or recognition. The look of someone who'd been underestimated before and knew exactly what it meant, exactly what it cost, exactly what it would eventually require her to do about it. Then the moment passed. The mask slipped back into place. Elena Vasquez, maintenance worker, contractor, invisible member of the base ecosystem, continued with her day. 30 minutes later, she was mopping the floors in the battalion headquarters when Colonel Sarah Mitchell arrived for her morning briefing. Mitchell was 45, 22 years in the Marine Corps, and currently the commanding officer of the 3rd Battalion, 6th Marine Regiment. She had silver at her temples and the kind of bearing that came from leading Marines through 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan. She also had the administrative headache of managing a base that ran on the labor of dozens of civilian contractors whose backgrounds she knew nothing about and whose work she had to trust without verification. Most of them were former military, men and women who'd served their time and now kept the machinery running from the civilian side. Good people, by and large, but invisible to the Marines who depended on their work. Mitchell noticed Elena because Elena was thorough. Most contractors did the minimum required to keep their contracts. This woman cleaned like she was preparing for inspection, like every surface mattered, like someone's life might depend on the cleanliness of the floor she was mopping. Morning, Mitchell said as she passed. Elena looked up, made brief eye contact, nodded respectfully. Morning, ma'am. The interaction lasted 3 seconds. Mitchell continued to her office. Elena returned to her mopping. But something in those 3 seconds stuck with Mitchell. The way the contractor had looked at her, not the deference of a civilian employee, not the nervous respect of someone afraid of authority, but the acknowledgement of one professional to another. Equal recognition, briefly offered and immediately withdrawn. Strange. But Mitchell had more pressing concerns than analyzing the body language of maintenance staff. She had a briefing in 15 minutes with intelligence officers who'd bring news that would determine how her Marines spent the next 6 months of their lives. Elena finished the administrative building and moved on to the mess hall, where she worked through the breakfast rush, invisible among the clatter of trays and the conversations of Marines fueling up for the day ahead. She listened to fragments of talk, deployment schedules, training exercises, complaints about equipment and food, and the eternal bureaucracy of military life. Standard chatter from people who trusted that no one was paying attention to what they said around the cleaning lady. At 1,000 hours, she was restocking paper towels in the battalion headquarters restrooms when she heard voices carrying from the conference room down the hall. The door was open, the conversation not particularly sensitive, just routine planning discussion. But one voice made her pause. Kane's voice, explaining to a room full of NCOs why the morning's equipment failures were going to delay the afternoon training schedule. His tone was professional now, competent, the voice of a senior Marine who knew his job and took it seriously. Not the bullying swagger he'd used with her at dawn, but the real man underneath. Elena recognized the difference because she'd seen it before, had lived it in fact. The way people performed authority versus the way they actually exercised it when the performance wasn't necessary. Kane was better than the person he'd been with her, which meant he'd been playing a role, establishing dominance, making sure the hierarchy was understood and respected. She'd done the same thing herself, once upon a time. Different uniform, different rank structure, but the same fundamental need to establish who was in charge and who was expected to follow orders without question. It was a useful tool when used properly, dangerous when it wasn't. Elena finished restocking the restrooms and moved on to the next building. By 1200, she'd completed her assigned route and returned to the maintenance office to check in with her supervisor and receive the afternoon assignments. The office was a small trailer behind the motor pool, crowded with schedules and supply catalogs and the organized chaos of keeping a military installation running. Her supervisor was Dave Chen, a former Army sergeant who'd been working civilian maintenance for 8 years. He was competent, efficient, and completely uninterested in the personal lives of his contractors as long as they did their jobs and didn't cause problems. "How'd the morning go?" Chen asked without looking up from his paperwork. "Routine, no issues." "Good. This afternoon I need you to hit the barracks buildings. 3rd floor of Charlie Company is having HVAC problems, so they'll probably have fans running. Don't disturb anything, just work around it." Elena nodded, collected her supplies for the afternoon shift and headed toward the barracks complex. Charlie Company, 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines. She knew the unit designation, knew their deployment history, knew more about their operational capacity than any maintenance worker had any reason to know. But she'd learned to compartmentalize information, to file away details that might be useful later while maintaining the performance that kept her invisible. The barracks building was 3 stories of utilitarian concrete and metal, built to house Marines efficiently rather than comfortably. Elena started on the ground floor, working her way through the common areas while the building was mostly empty. Most of the Marines were either at training or at lunch, leaving behind only the smell of floor wax and the hum of fluorescent lights. She was cleaning windows on the 2nd floor when she heard boots on the stairs. Heavy, purposeful, the sound of Marines moving with intent. Elena glanced toward the stairwell and saw Kane ascending with 2 of his Marines, Peters and Williams, from the morning's coffee incident. They saw her at the same time she saw them. Kane's expression shifted immediately from neutral to annoyed, as if her presence was a personal affront to his day. "Well, look what we have here," Kane said, loud enough for his Marines to hear. "It's our friend from this morning, the contractor who can't walk without destroying Marine Corps property." Peters and Williams grinned. This was familiar territory, the kind of casual harassment that established pecking order and provided entertainment during an otherwise routine day. Elena continued cleaning windows, moving the squeegee in steady strokes. She didn't respond to Kane's comment, didn't acknowledge his presence beyond the minimum required politeness. Her breathing remained steady, controlled. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Kane interpreted her silence as submission. He stepped closer, positioning himself where she'd have to look at him if she turned around. "I asked you a question this morning," Kane said, "about staying out of our way. You remember that conversation?" Elena finished the window she was working on and moved to the next one. "I remember, Gunny." "Good. Because right now you're in our way again. This is Marine Corps property. These are Marine Corps barracks. We don't need civilians wandering around where Marines live and work." Peter spoke up, emboldened by his gunny's tone. "Yeah, who knows what kind of intelligence she might be gathering, taking notes on our security procedures, our daily routines." The comment was meant as a joke, but something in Elena's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Her hand tightened slightly on the squeegee handle. Her breathing pattern held steady, but there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there moments before. Kane caught the change. He'd been watching for it, looking for the crack in her composure that would prove she was just another soft civilian who folded under pressure. "Something wrong?" Kane asked. "Peters make you nervous talking about intelligence gathering?" Elena turned to face them fully for the first time since they had arrived. When she met Kane's eyes, there was something different in her expression. Still controlled, still professional, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "No, Gunny, nothing wrong." But her voice had changed too, flatter, more precise, the tone of someone who was choosing her words very carefully because the wrong ones might reveal more than she intended. Kane sensed the shift and pressed harder. "Good. Because we wouldn't want any misunderstandings about what contractors are and aren't supposed to be doing on this base. Cleaning windows, mopping floors, staying invisible. That's your job. Everything else is Marine Corps business, and Marine Corps business isn't any of your concern." Elena set down her squeegee and faced him squarely. The movement was deliberate, controlled, and somehow managed to convey respect and challenge simultaneously. "I understand my job, Gunny. I understand exactly what I'm supposed to do and where I'm supposed to be." The emphasis on "exactly" was subtle but unmistakable. Kane felt it like a challenge, though he couldn't have articulated why. There was something in the way she stood, in the precision of her language, that suggested she understood far more than a maintenance worker should understand about Marine Corps operations and hierarchy. "Is that right?" Kane stepped closer, using his height and bulk to crowd her space. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you've got opinions about Marine Corps business that you're not sharing. Maybe you think you know something about how we operate. Maybe you think your civilian job gives you insight into military matters." Elena's gray eyes never wavered from his face. "I think my job gives me insight into cleaning windows, Gunny. That's all." But she said it like someone who was holding back a dozen other things she could say, like someone with knowledge she was choosing not to display. Kane felt the challenge in her restraint, and it irritated him in ways he couldn't fully explain. "Yeah? Well, let me share some insight with you about military matters." Kane's voice took on the edge he used with Marines who were about to face disciplinary action. Marines earn their place through blood, sweat, and years of training. We earn the right to wear the uniform, to carry the title, to serve our country in ways that matter. Contractors mop floors. Peters and Williams were watching the exchange with growing interest. They'd seen their gunny-dressed-down Marines who'd screwed up, but this was different. This was personal in a way that didn't make immediate sense. Elena listened to Kane's speech without changing expression. When he finished, she nodded once. "You're absolutely right, Gunny. Marines earn everything they have." Again, the way she said it carried weight that the words themselves didn't explain, like she was agreeing with him while simultaneously pointing out something he was missing. Like she knew exactly what it took to earn what Marines had and was choosing not to elaborate on how she knew. Kane felt the frustration building. He'd been trying to put this contractor in her place, to establish the natural order of things. But somehow the conversation felt like it was slipping away from him, like she was controlling the interaction without doing anything that he could point to as disrespectful or inappropriate. "Damn right I'm right," Kane said. "And part of what Marines earn is the respect that comes with the uniform. When Marines walk through these barracks, contractors step aside. When Marines are working, contractors find somewhere else to be. When Marines are having conversations about Marine Corps business, contractors keep their ears closed and their mouths shut." Elena picked up her squeegee and turned back to the window. "Understood, Gunny." But as she returned to her work, Kane caught something that made his blood pressure spike. Elena's sleeve had ridden up slightly as she reached for the window, exposing the inside of her left forearm. There was a mark there, not a decoration, not a civilian tattoo, but something that looked like faded military ink. The kind of marking that came from deployment, from units that didn't always follow regulations about body art. Kane stepped closer, trying to get a better look, but Elena had already adjusted her sleeve, covering whatever he thought he'd seen. "Problem, Gunny?" Elena asked without turning around. Kane stared at her back, at the precise way she held herself, the military bearing she couldn't quite hide, even while performing manual labor. Something was wrong here. Something didn't add up. "No problem," Kane said finally. "Just make sure you remember what I said about staying out of Marine Corps business." He led Peters and Williams up to the third floor, but his mind was still on the contractor with the gray eyes and the perfect posture and the something on her arm that she didn't want him to see. Elena finished cleaning the windows on the second floor and moved on to the next building, but she could feel Kane's suspicion like a weight between her shoulder blades. She'd been careful for 6 months, had maintained her cover with precision born of necessity and experience. But Kane was observant, and observant people asked questions that could lead to answers she wasn't prepared to give. She checked her watch, a civilian timepiece that looked appropriately cheap for a maintenance worker's salary, but had capabilities that extended far beyond telling time. 13:47 hours. In 13 minutes, she was supposed to check in with her handler. In 4 hours, she would receive new intelligence about the security breach that had brought her to Quantico in the first place. In 6 days, if everything went according to plan, she would complete her mission and disappear from this base as quietly as she'd arrived. Unless Kane's suspicion grew into something more dangerous. Unless someone started asking questions that connected her to operations that didn't officially exist. Elena pushed her cleaning cart toward the next building and tried not to think about how quickly missions could go wrong when people started looking too closely at things they were supposed to ignore. Above her, in the third-floor window of Charlie Company Barracks, Kane was watching her move across the courtyard with the focused attention of a Marine who'd learned to trust his instincts about threats. And right now, his instincts were telling him that the woman pushing the cleaning cart was not what she appeared to be. The afternoon was about to get much more complicated for both of them. Kane spent the next 4 hours thinking about the contractor with the gray eyes. Through weapons maintenance, through afternoon chow, through the endless paperwork that consumed too much of every Marine's day, he kept coming back to the feeling that something was off. Not wrong exactly, but not right either. Like looking at a photograph where one detail was out of place but you couldn't identify what. By 1800 hours, he'd decided he was overthinking it. Contractors were contractors. Some of them were former military, which explained the bearing. Some of them had tattoos, which explained the marking he thought he'd seen. Some of them were just better at their jobs than others, which explained the attention to detail. There was no conspiracy, no mystery, just a maintenance worker who happened to carry herself like she'd been around Marines long enough to pick up their habits. But when Kane walked into Murphy's Tavern at 1830 for his weekly beer with the NCOs from 3rd Battalion, the first thing he heard was Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez talking about the new cleaning contractor. "I'm telling you, there's something different about this one," Rodriguez was saying to a table of senior enlisted Marines. "She cleaned our armory yesterday, and I swear she knew more about weapon storage protocols than half my Marines do. Didn't touch anything wasn't supposed to touch. But the way she moved around the equipment, it wasn't like someone who'd never seen an M4 before." Staff Sergeant Kim nodded over his beer. "I saw her in the motor pool last week. One of my mechanics was having trouble with a Humvee engine, and she glanced over and said something about checking the fuel injection system. Turned out she was right. What kind of janitor knows about military vehicle maintenance?" Kane slid into an empty chair at their table, his interest suddenly sharp. "You talking about the contractor? Elena something?" "Vasquez," Rodriguez supplied. "You've run into her?" "This morning. Spilled coffee on me, then acted like getting dressed down by a gunny was no big deal." Kane signaled the waitress for a beer. "What do we know about her background?" "Not much," Kim said. "Dave Chen hired her about 6 months ago. Says she does good work, doesn't cause problems, keeps to herself. Former military, but Chen doesn't know which branch or what she did." "Could be Army," Rodriguez suggested. "Would explain the weapons knowledge." "Could be Air Force," Kim countered. "They work on vehicles, too." Kane's beer arrived, and he took a long drink while processing this information. Other Marines were talking about Elena Vasquez. She'd made an impression on multiple senior NCOs, all of them noticing the same thing: competence that went beyond what her job required. "Anyone actually ask her about her service?" Kane asked. "Chen says she doesn't talk about it," Rodriguez replied. "Personal policy, apparently, says she did her time and moved on." That could mean anything. Some veterans loved sharing war stories. Others treated their military service like a closed chapter they didn't want to revisit. Both reactions were normal, but Kane's instincts were still bothering him about the whole situation. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. "There's something else," Kim said, lowering his voice slightly. "I was talking to Captain Morrison this afternoon. He mentioned that Colonel Mitchell asked him to run a background check on all the new contractors. Standard security review, nothing unusual. But when Morrison tried to pull Vasquez's file, he hit some kind of clearance wall." Kane set down his beer. "What kind of clearance wall?" "The kind that says her background check goes through different channels than normal contractor vetting. Morrison couldn't get details, just confirmation that she's cleared for the work she's doing." Rodriguez frowned. "That's not normal for maintenance staff." "No," Kim agreed, "it's not." Kane felt the pieces of his unease starting to form a pattern: military bearing, technical knowledge, classified background. The tattoo he'd glimpsed on her forearm, the way she'd responded to his aggression, not with fear or resentment, but with the controlled composure of someone who'd been through worse. "You think she's undercover?" Rodriguez asked. "Some kind of investigator?" "For what?" Kim shook his head. "Base security is handled by MPs. If there was an investigation, we'd know about it." Kane didn't respond immediately. He was thinking about the conversation that morning, about the way Elena had acknowledged his authority without actually submitting to it. Like someone who understood the hierarchy but wasn't intimidated by it. Like someone who'd operated within military command structures at a level where being intimidated could get you killed. "Maybe she's not investigating us," Kane said slowly. "Maybe she's hiding from something." The table went quiet. That was a different kind of speculation, with different implications. Veterans hiding from things usually meant PTSD, addiction, legal problems, or worse. Military service left marks on people, and not all of them were visible. "Could be witness protection," Rodriguez suggested. "Former military makes sense for that. They'd have experience staying under the radar." "Could be," Kim agreed. "Would explain the classified background check and the reluctance to talk about her service." Kane nodded, but part of him wasn't convinced. Witness protection felt like a civilian explanation for something that his military instincts were telling him was more complex. Elena Vasquez moved like someone who was still operational, still engaged, still mission-focused. People in hiding tended to be more paranoid, more isolated. She was careful, but she wasn't afraid. The conversation shifted to other topics: deployment schedules, training rotations, complaints about the latest administrative changes from headquarters. But Kane only half listened. His mind was still on the contractor with too much competence and too many classified details in her background. At 2100 hours, Kane left Murphy's and drove back to base to pick up some paperwork he'd forgotten in his office. The night shift had taken over, skeleton crew maintaining security and handling emergencies. The administrative buildings were mostly dark, but Kane had a key and authorization to access his workspace after hours. He was walking across the parking lot when he saw movement near the battalion headquarters, a figure with a cleaning cart working the night shift that handled deep cleaning when the buildings were empty. Elena Vasquez, visible under the security lights, methodically working her way through tasks that required access to secure areas. Kane stopped in the shadow of his vehicle and watched. Elena's movements were precise, efficient, but there was something else. She paused occasionally, not to rest, but to listen. Her head would turn slightly, tracking sounds that Kane couldn't hear from his position, the hypervigilance of someone who'd been trained to monitor their environment constantly. She finished cleaning the entrance area and moved inside the building. Kane waited 5 minutes, then followed. His office was on the second floor, so he had legitimate reason to be there, but he moved quietly anyway, curious about what Elena was doing after hours. He found her on the first floor, mopping the corridor outside the conference rooms where classified briefings were held. Nothing unusual about that. Those areas needed to be cleaned like everywhere else. But Elena wasn't just mopping. She was listening to the voices coming from Conference Room B, where Colonel Mitchell was conducting a late evening briefing with her intelligence officers. The door was closed, the conversation muffled, probably not audible to someone just walking by. But Elena had positioned herself where the acoustics were best, where someone with training in intelligence gathering could pick up fragments of conversation. Kane felt his suspicion crystallize into something harder. Elena Vasquez wasn't just a contractor with military bearing. She was actively conducting surveillance. He stepped into the corridor, his boots making deliberate noise on the tile floor. Elena looked up from her mopping, saw him approaching, and her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Still calm, still professional, but with an awareness that the situation had just become more complex. "Working late tonight," Kane said, keeping his voice casual, but letting his body language convey that this wasn't a casual encounter. "Night shift," Elena replied. "These areas can't be cleaned during business hours." Kane nodded toward Conference Room B, where the briefing was still ongoing. "Important meeting in there. Probably shouldn't be disturbed." Elena followed his gaze, then looked back at him. "I'm being very quiet." "Quiet enough to listen?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena's grip on the mop handle shifted slightly, and Kane caught a glimpse of her forearm again. The same marking he'd seen that afternoon, but from this angle, under these lights, he could make out more detail. It wasn't a civilian tattoo. It was military ink, faded, but still recognizable to someone who'd seen enough unit insignia. A wolf's head, stylized, overlaid with coordinates and symbols that Kane couldn't decode but recognized as operational markings. Elena saw him looking and adjusted her sleeve to cover the tattoo, but it was too late. Kane had seen enough to know that whatever unit had authorized that marking, it wasn't conventional infantry. "Gunny," Elena said quietly, "I think we need to talk." Kane's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, not drawing, just ensuring access. Elena noticed the movement and shook her head slightly. "Not here, not now, too many ears." She was right. The building had security cameras, and Colonel Mitchell's briefing was still ongoing 20 feet away. Whatever this conversation was going to be, it needed to happen somewhere private. "Murphy's parking lot," Kane said. 30 minutes. Elena nodded, returned to her mopping, and Kane continued to his office. But his mind was racing. Unit tattoos with coordinates meant special operations. Special operations veterans didn't typically end up pushing mop buckets unless something had gone very wrong with their transition to civilian life. Or unless they were still working, just not in any capacity that appeared on organizational charts. Kane collected his paperwork and left the building, but instead of going home, he sat in his truck in Murphy's parking lot and tried to process what he'd stumbled into. A contractor with special operations background, working night shifts that gave her access to classified briefings, listening to intelligence discussions that were above the clearance level of most Marines on base. At 2200 hours, Elena's civilian sedan pulled into the parking lot. She parked 3 spaces away from Kane's truck, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment before getting out. When she approached his vehicle, her body language was different from their previous encounters, less deferential, more direct. Like she'd made a decision to drop part of the performance she'd been maintaining. Kane rolled down his window. "Get in." Elena walked around to the passenger side and slid into the seat beside him. In the close confines of the truck cab, Kane could smell the cleaning chemicals on her uniform, but underneath that was something else. The faint scent of gun oil and metal polish. The smell of someone who spent time around weapons, maintaining them, caring for them with the attention that came from knowing your life might depend on their reliability. "You want to tell me what I just saw back there?" Kane asked. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring through the windshield at the neon signs of the businesses across the street. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost the careful neutrality she'd maintained during all their previous interactions. "How much do you know about Joint Task Force operations, Gunny?" The question caught Kane off guard. "Standard knowledge. Why?" "Because what you saw back there was a Joint Task Force operator doing her job." Kane felt the world shift slightly. "You're active duty?" I'm operational, Elena corrected. There's a difference. What kind of operational? Elena turned to look at him directly. In the dim light from the parking lot, her gray eyes were flat and serious. The kind that doesn't officially exist, the kind that gets embedded in places where normal oversight doesn't reach, the kind that's designed to identify threats that conventional security measures miss. Kane's mind was racing through implications. You're investigating this base. I'm investigating security breaches that originate from this base. Someone with access to classified briefings has been selling intelligence to private contractors. 3 operations have been compromised in the last 8 months. Good Marines have died because someone here is trading secrets for money. The weight of that statement settled over Kane like a physical thing. Marines dead because of betrayal from within. It was the kind of threat that every service member understood instinctively. Not the enemy you could see coming, but the corruption that rotted the system from inside. Why are you telling me this? Kane asked. Because you're observant. Because you notice things that other people missed. Because in about 6 hours, my cover is going to be blown anyway when Colonel Mitchell receives a priority briefing about the investigation. Elena's expression was grim. And because the person selling intelligence knows I'm here. They've been testing me, trying to figure out what I know and what I'm capable of. Kane felt a chill run down his spine. Testing you how? Equipment failures that shouldn't happen. Duty rosters that put specific people in specific places at specific times. Questions about my background that come from directions they shouldn't come from. Elena's voice was steady, but Kane could hear the tension underneath. Someone on this base has been very interested in the new maintenance contractor, and that interest is about to escalate into something more direct. As if summoned by her words, headlights swept across the parking lot. A military police vehicle was pulling in, moving slowly, deliberately. Kane recognized the patrol pattern, not random security, but targeted surveillance. They're looking for you, Kane said. They're looking for me talking to you, Elena corrected. Because you asked the right questions, noticed the right details. Because you're now a threat to whoever's been selling secrets. The MP vehicle completed its circuit of the parking lot and drove away, but Kane knew it would be back. The message was clear. This conversation was being monitored. Elena reached for the door handle. I need to go, but Gunny, when this goes public tomorrow, remember what I told you. Remember that there are Marines on this base who aren't what they appear to be, and some of them aren't on our side. She was halfway out of the truck when Kane called after her. Elena, what's your real call sign? She paused, 1 foot on the ground, looking back at him with an expression that was part resignation, part relief at finally being asked the right question. Shadow Wolf, she said quietly. Task Force Gray Operations, Direct Action Unit. Officially killed in action 18 months ago during a classified operation in Syria. She closed the truck door and walked back to her sedan, leaving Kane sitting in the darkness, trying to process the revelation that he'd spent the day harassing a dead woman who was hunting a traitor. Tomorrow was going to change everything. Kane didn't sleep that night. He sat in his quarters staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction he'd had with Elena Vasquez, Shadow Wolf, trying to reconcile the woman who'd quietly cleaned up spilled coffee with someone who'd been officially killed in action during classified operations. The pieces didn't fit, except they did. Every detail that had seemed slightly off now made perfect sense. The breathing pattern, the posture, the way she'd assessed him during their confrontations, like she was cataloging his capabilities and weaknesses. The hypervigilance he'd noticed outside the battalion headquarters, all of it pointed to someone who was still operational, still dangerous, still very much alive despite what official records claimed. At 0445, Kane's secure phone buzzed with a priority message, emergency briefing for all senior NCOs at 0530. No details, just a directive to report to the main conference room immediately. Kane dressed quickly and drove through the pre-dawn darkness to base, his mind racing through possibilities. The conference room was packed when he arrived. Every gunnery sergeant, master sergeant, and first sergeant from 3rd Battalion was there, along with several officers Kane didn't recognize. Their uniforms were crisp but anonymous. No unit patches, no name tags, no identifying marks beyond rank insignia. The kind of people who showed up when situations moved beyond normal chain of command protocols. Colonel Mitchell stood at the front of the room, her expression grim. Behind her was a projection screen showing a classified briefing header that Kane had never seen before. Joint Task Force Gray, Compartmented Operations. "Gentlemen," Mitchell began, "what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. What you're about to learn changes how you view security on this base, how you interact with personnel you think you know, and how you understand threats to Marine Corps operations." Kane felt his stomach drop. Ellen had been right. The revelation was coming, and it was coming hard. Mitchell clicked to the next slide, which showed a photograph of Elena Vasquez. Not the maintenance worker they all recognized, but a younger version in full combat gear, standing next to a helicopter in what looked like a desert environment. Her uniform bore no identifying marks, but her gear was high-end, specialized, the kind issued to operators who worked outside conventional military structures. "This is Commander Elena Santos," Mitchell continued, using a name that was clearly different from the one they all knew. "Call sign Shadow Wolf. She's a joint operations specialist who has been embedded on this base for 6 months as part of a classified investigation." The room erupted in whispers. Kane stayed silent, but he could feel the shock radiating from the other NCOs. Everyone recognized Elena from the photograph, but seeing her in military context was jarring, like discovering that someone you'd known for months was actually someone else entirely. "Commander Santos is investigating security breaches that have resulted in the compromise of 3 joint operations over the past 8 months, Mitchell continued. "Intelligence suggests that classified information is being leaked from this base to private military contractors, who then sell that information to hostile actors." Staff Sergeant Kim raised his hand. "Ma'am, are you saying one of our people is selling secrets?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Mitchell's voice was flat, angry. "Someone with access to classified briefings has been systematically compromising operations. Marines have died because of this betrayal." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Kane looked around at the faces of men he'd served with for years, trying to imagine any of them capable of that level of treachery. It seemed impossible, but Elena Santos had been right. The threat was internal. "Commander Santos has identified several suspects," Mitchell continued. "But before she could complete her investigation, her cover was compromised. As of yesterday evening, hostile actors know she's operational on this base." Kane's blood ran cold. He thought about the MP vehicle in Murphy's parking lot, about Elena's certainty that she was being watched. The situation had escalated beyond investigation into active threat. "Which means," Mitchell said, "that this base is now in lockdown status until the threat is neutralized. No one enters or leaves without authorization. All personnel are confined to base pending security review. And Commander Santos is shifting from covert investigation to overt operations." One of the anonymous officers stepped forward. Kane could see now that he was wearing the insignia of a Navy commander, probably Elena's actual chain of command. "What you need to understand," the commander said, "is that Shadow Wolf is one of the most capable operators in Joint Special Operations. Her mission record is classified beyond your clearance levels, but I can tell you that she's conducted over 40 successful operations across 7 countries. She's been presumed dead for 18 months because that's the only way she could operate at the level this mission required." Kane raised his hand. "Sir, what's the threat level to base personnel?" "High," the commander replied without hesitation. "The people selling intelligence know they've been exposed. They'll attempt to eliminate Shadow Wolf and anyone who might have information about their activities. That includes anyone who's had significant contact with her during her time undercover." The room went silent. Kane felt every eye in the room turning toward him. Word had spread about his confrontations with Elena, about his questions regarding her background. He'd made himself a target without realizing it. "Gunnery Sergeant Kane," Mitchell said, "you'll report to Commander Santos immediately after this briefing. Your observations about her cover identity helped accelerate this investigation." Kane nodded, but his mind was racing. Elena had warned him this was coming, but hearing it officially made the danger feel immediate and personal. Someone on this base wanted him dead because he'd noticed that a maintenance worker carried herself like a special operations veteran. The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, covering security protocols, threat response procedures, and the fact that the base would essentially be under martial law until the investigation was complete. When it ended, Kane was directed to a small office in the basement of the battalion headquarters, a space he'd never seen before that looked more like a tactical operations center than standard Marine Corps administration. Elena was there, but she'd transformed completely. Gone was the maintenance uniform, replaced by tactical gear that was military but unidentifiable. Black fatigues with no unit patches, a sidearm that Kane recognized as a custom .45 caliber pistol, and equipment that suggested capabilities far beyond what conventional Marines carried. Her hair was still pulled back in a practical bun, but everything else about her presence screamed operator. "Gunny," she said when he entered. "Thanks for coming." Kane looked around the room, taking in the communications equipment, the wall-mounted displays showing base schematics, the tactical maps marked with positions and timelines. This was all here the whole time? "Joint Task Force maintains operational facilities at strategic locations," Elena replied. "Most of the time they're empty. When we need them, they activate." She gestured toward a chair across from a desk covered with files and photographs. Kane sat down, still trying to reconcile this version of Elena with the woman who'd apologized for spilling his coffee. "I need you to walk me through everyone who's asked questions about my background," Elena said. "Every conversation, every comment, every indication that someone was paying attention to the new maintenance contractor." Kane spent the next hour detailing his interactions and observations. Elena listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a tablet that looked far more sophisticated than anything the Marines used for administrative work. "Rodriguez Kim, Captain Morrison," Elena repeated when Kane finished. "Anyone else?" "Chen, my supervisor, but he hired me. Questions from him would be normal." Elena nodded, but Kane could see her mind working through possibilities. "What about unofficial channels? Conversations at Murphy's, discussions during PT, casual speculation about the new contractors?" Kane thought back to the previous night's conversation at the bar. "Rodriguez mentioned you knew weapons protocols. Kim said you understood vehicle maintenance. People were curious, but nothing that seemed unusual." "Curiosity is normal," Elena agreed. "But someone on this base has been doing more than being curious. Someone has been actively investigating my background through channels they shouldn't have access to." As if summoned by her words, the communication system on Elena's desk crackled to life. A voice Kane didn't recognize, speaking in the clipped tones of someone delivering urgent intelligence. "Shadow Wolf, this is base security. We have unauthorized access attempts on the contractor database. Someone's trying to pull Elena Vasquez's complete file using administrative credentials." Elena's expression hardened. "Time frame?" "Started 20 minutes ago. They're using legitimate access codes, but the search parameters are outside normal administrative scope." "Can you trace the source?" "Working on it, but they're covering their tracks well. Professional-level operational security." Elena looked at Kane. "This is what I was talking about. Someone on this base has resources and training that go beyond normal Marine Corps capabilities." Kane felt the pieces clicking into place. "You think we have another operator here? Someone working for the other side?" "I think we have someone with access to systems they shouldn't have, knowledge they shouldn't possess, and motivation to eliminate anyone who threatens their operation." Elena stood and moved to the wall display, showing base schematics. "The question is whether they're going to try to run or try to fight." The communication system crackled again. "Shadow Wolf, we have movement. 3 vehicles departing the base through the north gate. Occupants unknown, but they're moving fast." Elena cursed under her breath. "Running it is, but they'll be back." She turned to Kane, her expression serious. "Gunny, I need you to understand something. The people who've been selling intelligence aren't just corrupt Marines. They're part of a network that includes private military contractors, foreign intelligence services, and domestic actors who profit from American military failures. They have resources, training, and absolutely no compunction about killing anyone who threatens their operation." Kane absorbed this. "What do you need from me?" Elena smiled for the first time since he had entered the room, and it transformed her face completely. Not the careful neutrality of the maintenance worker or the focused intensity of the operator, but something warmer, more human. "I need you to help me finish what I started," she said. "These people have been selling Marine lives for profit. They've killed operators I've served with, compromised missions that took years to develop, and betrayed everything the Corps stands for. She moved to the tactical display and highlighted several locations on the base. They're gone for now, but they'll be back. They have too much invested in this operation to just walk away. When they return, they'll come hard and fast, trying to eliminate anyone who can testify about their activities. Kane studied the display, recognizing defensive positions and choke points. You want to set a trap. I want to end this, Elena corrected, but I need Marines I can trust, people who understand what's at stake and won't hesitate when the shooting starts. The shooting? Elena's expression was grim. Gunny, these people have already killed Marines to protect their operation. They're not going to surrender quietly when we corner them. This is going to end with violence. Kane nodded slowly. He'd been in combat before, understood what Elena was saying. But the idea of fighting other Marines, even corrupt ones, felt wrong in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Elena seemed to read his thoughts. The people we're going after stopped being Marines the moment they decided to sell intelligence that got Americans killed. They're enemy combatants now, and they need to be treated accordingly. The communication system interrupted them again. Shadow Wolf, priority intelligence update. Vehicle surveillance shows the departing personnel are regrouping at a location 12 miles north of base. Electronic intercepts suggest they're planning to return tonight with additional personnel. Elena turned to Kane. Looks like we won't have to wait long. She moved to a wall locker and began removing equipment, additional weapons, communication gear, body armor that was clearly designed for close-quarters combat. I'm going to ask you to do something that's outside normal chain of command, Gunny. I'm going to ask you to trust my authority and help me set up defensive positions for what's coming. Kane watched her gear up, noting the practiced efficiency with which she checked weapons and adjusted equipment. This was someone who'd done this many times before, in places where mistakes meant death and success meant going home alive. What's the plan? Kane asked. Elena looked at him with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and determination. We're going to show these bastards what happens when you betray Marines. Outside, the afternoon sun was climbing toward its peak, but Kane knew the real work would happen after dark, when the people who'd been selling secrets thought they could return to finish what they had started. He was about to learn just how far Shadow Wolf would go to protect the Corps that had given her everything, and how deadly she could be when Marines were threatened by enemies wearing friendly uniforms. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where are you watching from and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.